Hey, welcome back to Diabolic Shrimp, the least professional talk show on the internet. I'm your host, bestselling author and comic creator, and now video game designer, Josh Grant. And today we have a very special guest, Maria Bouroncle. She's written some true crime kind of things. She's written some other stuff as well, and so award-winning author. Just a fascinating. Book that she wrote. We're going to talk all about it today. Just an interesting personal connection to a crime that happened years ago, and so we're going to dive all into that in just a second. Really quick, a word from our highlighted books. I love to highlight books in our channel. Oh, yeah, sorry. I was like, if you're joining us and you have no idea what this is, Diabolic Shrimp, we're connected to the website Diabolic Shrimp, where we love to connect authors and readers. On this show, I love to interview interesting and famous people from across the world. So if you want to join us in that journey, smash that subscribe button down below. Hit the like if you like this, and then comment as well if you're joining us later. If you're joining us live, because it's a live show, we love to be interactive. Over in there in the live chat, you're welcome to drop some questions for Maria, or just comment, and we love to be interactive with you. And so, yeah, do join us on that journey. We love to have a lot of fun on this show. But a couple of our highlighted books here. First off, of course, I got to put my own plug in here. The Lost Boy is one of my best-selling comics, and so since we're talking crime today, I thought it'd be kind of fun to show off my crime-fighting vigilante comic. If Peter Pan became a vigilante crime fighter, The Lost Boy, and so check those out. You can read them on everything that you can read stuff on, and so there's physical copies as well. And so also down here we have Spontanea, the author of Spontanea, Carl Paolino. He is gracious enough. He was on the show a few weeks ago. So if you check back a couple videos ago, he was on the show, and he created like Celebrity Deathmatch and worked with Mark Hamill and all this. But he's going to give away a couple of actual physical signed copies to people that like comment on the video, the interview that I did with him a couple of weeks ago. So if you look back on the channel, comment on that video or just say hi or something in the comments, and you're entered into the drawing. He has a couple of signed copies, and we're going to give those away at the end of this month. So definitely go do that if that's something you're interested in. So well, I'm going to bring us back to us now, and so Maria, like I said, award-winning author, wrote this really fascinating. I've reviewed it, so go check it out. Fascinating book. It came to me on a whim. But a bit about her. Maria Bouroncle was born in 1965 in the Swedish city of it's Gothenburg. Sorry, my German accent is coming out now. She has lived in Washington, D.C. since 2002, an economist by profession. Maria, who spent over 25 years in the field of international development, published her first book in 2018 and subsequently decided to pursue her passion for writing professionally, subsequently winning several awards for her work. Well, Maria's been waiting in the wings for just a bit, so let's bring her on. Maria, welcome to Diabolic Shrimp.
Hi, thank you so much, Josh. Lovely to meet you in person at last.
Indeed. Well, it's so great to have you on the show. It's gonna be awesome talking about your book because I absolutely loved your book. It was yeah, and we're gonna talk all about it today. But it was so well written, and it's true crime. But you have this wonderful gift for like both doing like true crime, but like capturing the drama of it, but also like capturing really that human side. And I do know you have a personal connection, and I wonder if it stems from that. But before we really dive into It Came to Me on a Whim, which by the way, if you're watching this, down in the description below, you can find all Maria's books, and you can find the links to her website as well. It talks a little bit about her journey there, so it's a really fascinating read if you want to check it out. But Maria, like before we get into that, like I always love to introduce people through show and tell. Did you bring us anything for show and tell?
I did. I actually brought my first
Oh
book.
yes, bring the book. Yes, show it off. We
Yeah,
love shameless self promotion is what we're all about on this show.
of
And so
course. I didn't mean to bring the book. I wanted to bring the letters that Ingeborg
hmm.
wrote to her husband from prison, but I forgot them in Sweden. But I have incorporated the letters in the book. So at least if you read the book, you can read her letters as well. So
I think that's the best excuse I think anyone's ever had for not having a show and tell item on this show. Like, I forgot it in Sweden. I'm gonna start using that all the time, actually.
you should.
So, well, that's so great. Well, I was like, well, like I said, it's a wonderful book. For I mean, it can get a broader audience, because you definitely get the true crime crew, of this fascinating and like tragic event, that kind of happened, and you definitely get that true crime crew, but you also like capture a lot of other things in that book, and even like the history piece of it, I find fascinating. I have an emphasis in history, so yeah, so it's a really interesting book, but so before we get to it came to me on a whim, though. I was like, we're going to get there. But just a few questions about you before we get there. I was interested. You were an economist for like 25 years and you worked on like international development. So can you just tell us a bit about that for just a minute?
Yeah, I when I was young, I wanted to change the world to a better place, I guess, and so I studied international relations and economics, and I decided to start working for United Nations, and so I've moved around quite a bit. I lived in Finland, in Copenhagen, in Denmark, in France, in Spain, and in 2002 I moved to Washington D.C. and I love it here, so I decided to stay. But in when was it now? Actually, it was way back in 1999 that I found out about this tragic event of my great
Mm,
aunt who killed her three children. But I couldn't, it was such an overwhelming news because I knew her very well as a child. So it took me like 10 years to overcome the shock. But then
yeah.
after that, I started to began digging in through the archives. And so I would probably have continued to work within this Inter-American Development Bank, where I used to work for 17 years in DC, if I hadn't stumbled upon this story, because
Uh-huh.
I really enjoyed my work and my colleagues, and the routine of being an employee and so on. So it was not until this first book was published in 2018 that I decided to to switch careers, so to speak, and try to move back to Sweden, which I did in 2018. But I wouldn't say it was a cultural shock, but after all, I am Swedish, right? But it's different. So
Yeah,
now
it's definitely weird, like when you have to when you move back even to the place you like grew up, if you haven't been there in a while. It's kind of like you said, I find that fascinating. It's like not quite a cultural shock, but it kind of is, it's like you kind of have to get used to it just a bit.
yeah.
So
So now
over
I'm very fortunate to be able to divide my time actually between Sweden and the United States. So
Yeah, I was like,
yeah,
well, I was like, that's one of those things. I was like, all those places you listed living. I'm like, oh, those are all the vacation spots I want to go see sometime. So it's like, oh, yeah,
yeah.
I live there. So, was there any? You moved around a bit, so I was like, were there any was there any like favorite project that, or like projects you really enjoyed along the way doing development?
Yeah, of course, I'm very interested in education, especially for children.
Yes, I was
Yes,
like, I used to be
and
a
book.
teacher. If anyone doesn't know, but
Yeah. So actually, right now I'm combining my writing a bit with I'm working part time with a project in Uruguay,
okay,
and it's a cooperation between writers in of children's books in Sweden and an association for writers in Sweden that work together with a project in education. And
cool.
we're trying to do an interchange of literature. So the Swedish kids will read books from Uruguay, and the Uruguayan children will read books from Sweden.
I I love that. I was like, I my heart is still always like, like working with kids, and I became an author and a talk show host and game developer, but I still love to go back and teach and try to help kids be inspired to like write and or like achieve whatever they want to achieve. And so
Yeah.
I love your giving heart, honestly. That's a huge part. That's one of the pillars of Diabolic Shrimp is giving back, and it's one of the reasons I started Diabolic Shrimp years ago, and giving 10% to whatever. And so for anyone that doesn't know what Diabolic Shrimp is, so we give 10% to all sorts of things, and a lot of those are like initiatives for children. So
I
that's
didn't
really neat.
know that. That's
Yeah.
wonderful.
Yeah, if anyone wants to look our difference on the website, we'll tell you everything that we give to. It's like childhood disease research or ocean exploration or
Oh,
cleaning up the
wow.
environment. We do a lot of like giving projects and stuff. That's a huge part of it. So like, well, so
Great.
has your time as an economist in traveling like affected your writing in any way?
Well, right now it has, because I wanted to write after having written this first book that takes place in 1929, and then the independent sequel that was launched in Swedish in March, that
Okay.
is taking place during the Second World War in 1944. I was trying to write a third novel that about something I know a little bit more, so I wouldn't have to do so much research. So then I was thinking of writing something that took place in Latin America right now, and because I worked with Latin America basically all my life with development issues there, and but my first draft didn't turn out that well, so I'm not sure. I may go back to my historic fiction books, but that's
I
something
say
that
go for it though. Go for it, Maria. I was like, I feel like my final drafts don't ever turn out well. So I'm like, I just get to the point where I'm like, I'm tired of looking at it. I just send it out there and see what happens. So I was
I'm
like, go
sure
for it.
they turn out wonderful.
Oh, thanks. That's like, well, I can't imagine a draft of yours that doesn't turn out great because, like I said, I've read, It Came to Me on a Whim, and it was just like, I don't know, it was just the writing was just like both, like I said, both like dramatic, and you really captured like you really captured the attention there, but it's also like just the way you did it, you had this like perfect balance between like the true crime elements, but also like the heart to it. It really had a good heart and the humanity of it. And so I was just so impressed with how you
Thank
did that.
you,
And
Josh.
so now
That's so kind.
now are you ever challenged by I was like, I know you've traveled all over the place, so it's like getting different languages, and especially being like growing up in Sweden, it's like your English is amazing. I was like, I was trying to learn
Oh,
German. My
I'll
German
tell
is
my
terrible.
kids
But
that, because they always tease me, because and say that how is it possible that somebody that has lived in the U.S. for so long can't speak English? I'll show
yeah, show them that
I'll
clip. There we
show
go. That's the
them.
whole point of the show. And so, but like, so the would you say like it has like knowing multiple languages, like does that affect your writing in any way?
It does, because I write in Swedish, even though I've been living abroad for a long time,
Uh-huh.
and I when I wrote that, and I guess that's why I wasn't so happy with my recent draft, because when I wrote my two historical books, I did a lot of research on how people spoke in the 1920s and 30s and 40s in Sweden, right? And
Uh-huh.
also at the countryside and the dialects and so on. And so I'm pretty happy with that. And I'm very impressed of the translator of the book, Tom Ellett, that was able to translate that into English. But when I was trying to write about a contemporary society in Latin America, it was harder in Swedish, because I realized that I used a lot of um, modern words like texting. Yeah, and I sort of just said the same thing in Swedish, although you don't say it like that in Swedish. So I actually use probably, but many people do that in Sweden, using English words in a Swedish way. So
Uh-huh.
they actually don't exist. But I mean, I guess if we use them often enough, they will end up being part of the Swedish language. But yeah, so it does affect me a bit. And also, when I used to work in Helsinki, in Finland, I worked in a Nordic organization, and I don't know if you're familiar with it, but the Norwegian Danish and Swedish are fairly similar languages.
Uh-huh.
If you, so I can speak.
They're all hard. That's what I said. I was looking at some of those when I was learning German, but I was looking at some of the all the northern languages. It's just like I was like because I was like maybe they're similar to German, and I was like they are not.
No, maybe a little bit, but
If you say so.
yeah, no, but then it's very easy to, after a while, when you work with a Danish person and you speak Swedish and
Mhm.
they speak Danish, for example, or Norwegian, you end up thinking that those Norwegian words, if you just add a Swedish accent to them, they're actually Swedish too, but they're not. So, or expressions and so on. So it doesn't. I don't think, I can't notice it when I talk Swedish, but my publisher notices it then sometimes when I write, that they said, well, you don't say that in, in Swedish. So
Well, I
a
find that
little bit, not too
uh,
much.
I love your attention to detail. I was like, I wouldn't even like pick up on some of those things sometimes. And so like I love also it's like that's such a challenge to hand off your work to a translator and then make sure because it's like there's so much like nuance in writings and like there's always that thing you have like your heart set on and it's like and you have to capture just that right like sound or something and it's like giving that
Yeah.
over to a translator, I was like, I give you kudos because I was like, it's such a challenge. Like, I guess in a way, I connect with I do comics nowadays. Like, I used to write novels, but it's like I'm really focused on comics and the visual world now, and it's like, and it's really fun to me to see how things change. Like, as I like, it's like the artist is almost a translator, right? And so it's like I give a description and I give it to Laszlo, who's my artist and business partner,
Uh-huh.
and he does a great job with taking. I mean, he always does like what I had in my head, but better. It's like he does a great
Yeah,
job. It's like,
that's wonderful to
but
work with people like that.
yeah, well, but it's always like nerve wracking though. It's like giving, it's you give your baby to somebody and it's like and hope they go with it. And it's like and there's a lot of nuance in there, and we have to go back and forth. So for you with your writing with a translator, it's like was there anything that kind of changed along the way, or was there stuff that you had to kind of go back and forth on?
we I felt very uh, safe, I would say, with Tom, because he's from Scotland originally, but lived for many years in Canada. So
Okay.
he could write a fairly neutral English, which I liked a lot. And then I signed kind of a perfectionist, so I was actually comparing sentence by sentence in the whole book, and he had questions and I had questions, but I think he did an amazing job. It was a little bit harder for me to because the book has also been translated and published in Finnish and Dutch, and I don't speak one single word Dutch or Finnish. So
Oh yeah, so
there
it's
I
like
just had to trust
yeah.
the translators. But for example, the Dutch translator, she had a lot of very relevant questions, and also she found some errors. I had said 2 + 2 or 6 or something like that. It kind of is, and in inconsistencies. And so from her questions, I really also felt that, oh, she's doing an amazing job, even though I couldn't read the final product. So
Well, it's like well, let's take a look at the final product here. It's not spawned. If it'll load. There we go. And so here, click on these. So it came to me on a whim, the story of Ingeborg Anderson, child murderess. And so I mean, what a title, right? It'll capture your attention right away. And so here, let me
yeah,
so
it's
we're
actually what she said, that when the
yeah,
police
yeah.
asked her.
It's like and so like let's here I'll read a couple of the first lines for anyone that doesn't know about your book. It's about Ingeborg who did unfortunately murder her family, and again Maria has a personal connection which we'll dive all into here. So let me share some of the first lines from the book, and because I love your writing and just it's so rich. And so the four well-groomed schoolboys in black suits bore a heavy burden. The small, white-painted open coffin contained Ephraim, their friend and neighbor. Ephraim, a little boy named after his grandfather. Ephraim, a little boy who was only 3 years old. He looked as though he was sleeping, lying there on his back in his white nightshirt. His hands were folded across his chest, resting on the blanket woven by his mother, clutching a white rose. And so, like, your writing is just so gorgeous. And so, like, it came to me on a whim, the story of Ingeborg Anderson, child murderess. So can you tell us just a bit about the book, just in general, just a brief bit about it?
Yeah, so it tells a story about my great aunt who killed her three children on a cold Easter morning in 1929 in a small village called Besene in southwestern Sweden. And I knew her very well as a child because she lived with my grandparents, but I had no idea that she had been married or had any children, let alone three. So
Mm-hmm.
it came, as I mentioned earlier, as a shock when I found that out many years later when I was had just given birth to my own second child. And the little boy here, Ephraim, that you read about, he was 3 years old, and there was also an older boy who was 5 years old when Ingeborg drowned them, and she also had a little girl that was 1 year old, Lucia, that was actually warm when their dad found them in the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
So Ingeborg was supposed to wash the family's clothes that morning. Her husband Arthur had helped her carry in the wash tub in the kitchen and filled it with hot water, and then he left the family for a short while to together with his brother to go to the forest and fetch some wood because it was very unusually cold that spring. And when he comes back, because he has forgotten his watch, he finds the house completely silent and his three children hanging over the wash tub. So
And
my
what a tragedy and what a challenge. It's like to write about it, and I'm sorry for the tragedy of your family, your extended family there. And so what so you left economics because that's a story that, like, especially with that personal connections, like, I have to write this. When you when you have to write it, that's I always say that's the one you write. It's like the one that gets stuck in your head, the story or whatever. And so what set you on the journey of writing this, and kind of how did you kind of discover this family secret, I guess?
Yeah, so it was in already 1999. I was in my 30s and had just given birth to my second child, my daughter, and I got this phone call from my cousin, an older cousin. I lived in Helsinki, in Finland, with my family
Uh-huh.
at the time, and I didn't have much contact with this cousin. She was a little bit older than me, and I guess you know the feeling, right? When somebody, a relative that you don't speak with on a regular basis, call you,
Mm.
you have a gut
Yeah,
feeling that
it's like, what's
something's
going on?
wrong,
Yeah.
and or maybe somebody even
I feel like that when any of my relatives call me. I'm like,
oh
stop
gosh.
calling me. Just send a text. I'm just joking.
Yeah, no, so back then I don't know if we even have text, but no, so she called me, and the first she things she says when I pick up the receiver is that did you know that Aunt Ingeborg killed her three children? And
Oh, wow. I was like, that's quite the opening line there in a conversation.
yeah, I was in shock, and she didn't know, I didn't know, and she found out. She was a nurse at the time, and it was a patient of hers that had told her this story about this beautiful young lady that was 27 years old, and that had killed her children that Easter morning in 1929. And when he finished his story about this girl or woman, he said, "Well, by the way, aren't you familiar, or isn't that a relative of yours, that Vesene child murderess?" So Vesene was the name of a village, and
Okay. That's
apparently that
that's
was
also a difficult conversation starter or whatever. Like, oh yeah, by the way, aren't you a relative of someone?
yeah. So my
Is that?
cousin was in shock. I was in shock, and after that phone call, we actually didn't talk about it anymore, and I didn't talk. I did exactly the same thing as all my family members had done, over the last 80 years. I didn't speak with anybody. So it was not
Yeah,
until,
that's a hard thing to talk about, right?
yeah,
It's like,
especially when you just have a little baby yourself, that's the
mhm,
last news you want to
mm,
hear. So,
yeah.
and I really thought I knew Ingeborg very well, because she didn't pass away until I was 13 years old, and it wasn't until actually after like 12, 10, 12 more years that my thoughts of Ingeborg resurfaced when my dad passed. And they weren't related at all, but I guess when a close family member dies, you get all these
Feelings.
existential questions, right? And so
Mhm.
I finally asked my mom and my relatives, and they, most of them weren't born in 1929, and or if they were, they were very small. I didn't remember, and the older relatives, they definitely didn't want to talk about this. It was still a very open wound. So it
Yeah.
wasn't until my youngest aunt helped. She was basically the only one that wanted to find out together with me what had happened. So, and she knew when Ingeborg was born and where she was born. I only had her last name, Anderson, and in Sweden, that's
Wow.
the
Yeah,
most
I was gonna
common
say,
name.
yeah, that's one of the world's most common names, I think, is
Yeah,
just
you don't get
Anderson,
very
so
far Googling that. So, but with my aunt's help, we started digging through the archives, and I guess that after a while, I got obsessed with this story, because if it, Swedes are very fortunate in that sense, because we save everything, so it's easy to find information. I even got hold of her, grades from elementary school from 1908,
Oh,
and,
wow.
and yeah, and the police records and the court records and the medical records, and I read the psychiatric examination and yeah,
Wow.
everything.
Wow. I was
So
like, that's, well, like, what an incredible journey. Like, what were, like, along the way, it's like, what were some of the, uh, challenges? Oh, sorry, before I get there, I guess, we have, in the live chat here, Person says, "Hi. Hi, Person." So
hi.
so, so that was kinda random, sorry. But, like, what were some of the challenges along the way? I mean, it's like an incredible journey that you had to kinda go through, and, it's like, what were some of the challenges of writing the book, and what were some of the challenges, like, leading up to the book?
Yep. First, the research phase was kind of challenging, because nobody wanted to talk about this, and I was living in the United States when I started to do my research back in 2011, and so every summer holiday when I went back to Sweden, I dragged my aunt and mom along, trying to follow the footsteps of Ingeborg, because where she had lived in different the prison, the hospitals, and etc. And so that was one like practical challenge, because in my family up till then, everything. I guess it was a sort of a defense mechanism that my family had done almost everything to hide the existence of these three children.
Yeah.
Uh, so there
Well,
were
I
no
think it's
photos.
sometimes, yeah, I think it's, like, sometimes, easier to not forget, because you don't ever forget, but it's like to, you know, try to push some things off to the side so you don't have to, that's a hard thing to go through when it's like family, and even if it's like family you never even knew, even if it's like in the past, it's like it's
Yeah.
easier to kind of put it to the side, so it's like, not to talk about it.
Yeah, and especially back then when there was no knowledge about mental illnesses
Mhm.
and it's at the countryside. So yeah, so that was one challenge. When I got in contact with relatives of the dad of the dead children, it was much easier, because they had saved a lot of information. So they were actually the ones that gave me her letters, and that I have included in the book, the letters she wrote from prison to her
Mhm.
husband. And I also got in contact with a grandchild of the priest at the time, who wrote a diary. So I could read part of that diary, the priest that actually baptized and after that buried or held the funeral ceremony for children. So that was one challenge. But I would say that it was, I guess I had more information than I needed to write a book. But as an economist, I was very much in love with all these facts that I
Yeah, well,
found.
I'm
I
that's
wanted
where
to
that's where I
everything.
definitely I was gonna say, that's where I definitely connected with I got my emphasis in history, so it's like having all these like when I read it and you had like letters and all this and it's like all this like background that really like connected. I was like to me I'm like as a historian, it's like I was just
Yeah,
like,
no, I
oh
almost
my gosh,
hidden.
look at this. This is the great.
Yeah, no, I almost hidden my story by all the facts. So I myself was very happy with my first draft, but when I showed it for a friend that used to work in the publishing business, she was basically just yawning and said that, "Oh my God, I can tell that it's the first time you try writing a fiction book or yeah." She had a lot of good comments, and constructive comments. But when I first read them,
That's
I
what we
was
say. That's what we say
devastated.
as writers. Like they had a lot of good constructive comments when you're crying on the inside. Like when
Exactly. No, I
that's
was
their
crying
job is to
openly for
trash your
4 months. It took me
work.
forever to get over that first. But I let it sit for like 6 7 months, and then I mean, I reread it, and of course I agreed with
Mhm.
her. But and then I actually started to study creative writing at the university in Sweden. I took online courses, so. That helped a lot. I got very uh, good comments from my teachers and my fellow students in the course, and so it took a while to finish that book. I started with research phase probably in February 2011, and the book was published in December 2018. So you can count.
Yeah, it's quite the journey, but it's like so like when you like because you actually would travel to these places and talk to some of these people and so when you were doing that, it's like, was that hard for you, or was it like because sometimes it's even though you have that personal connection, sometimes when you dive into it, it's like it becomes more. It's like it's kind of weird. Like when I dive into some of my work, it's like you always have an emotional connection to your work, but like when you actually get into it, sometimes you kind of go into this like professional. I'm here for this, and you get really focused, I guess. And so
Yeah.
was it challenging like emotionally when you actually like show up at a place she used to live, or was it more just like a focus, like I'm looking for certain things?
I think it was very rewarding to visit the places that where she lived and where she was, and it was a way for me to try to understand how a person I loved as a child could
Yeah.
commit such an horrific crime, right? But
Hmm.
so I wouldn't say that visiting the different places was hard. I think that was more of a relief, I would say. But what was extremely hard was to write a book, and especially the parts like to, for example, to write about the funeral, to write
Yeah.
about when the
The
father
event went down.
finds the dead children. But
Yeah.
I tried not to write too many or describe too many gruesome details, because I think it's more a book about trying to understand
Yeah.
a person's horrible crime than to describe the crime itself. So those parts, especially the funeral and when the author finds his dead children, that was extremely hard to write, and something I put off for a long time. So even though those two chapters are now in the beginning of the book, I didn't write them until later, because it was much easier for me to write about her stay in prison or in the mental hospital, because that and also how she was received back in the village afterwards, because that's kind of more of a warmer story. It's not because it's even though it's a terrible um, um, I mean, it's a terrible story, obviously, of a horrible crime. I try to sort of describe the humanity around it and the
Hmm.
people that actually took care of her, that were especially at the prison. That was a huge surprise for me, because I expected something totally different than the
Yeah, especially in the
doctor
time
and the
period,
staff
you know.
that took care of
So
her. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, well, and I that was you know, like that's something that really struck me when I read the book was your like your not only attention to detail, like I said, on the history side of it. I was like the history piece of me was like, ooh, this is so well done. But like you have this great balance between like capturing, you know, captured the true crime part of it, like the elements that, you know, maybe true crime readers would really latch on to, but you also, and you told the story like in a dramatic way, so it really captures the attention. Yet like you said, you did a great job of like not going too I guess grizzly with it or something, and being really attentive to like the human side of it, and that's actually if people read my review on your thing, is like that's the thing that really stood out to me, was like you really had a care for the human side of this, and that's what I really personally loved about it, because I think that's what a lot of true crime is lacking, to be honest, is
Mhm.
that a lot of times people go for the shock value versus you really had the why and the fallout of that, and the heart to it, and all around. And so like how did you go about like achieving that kind of balance between all those things, and was that intentional, or was that just came kind of naturally from just like I said, you have a personal connection, so maybe it kind of came a bit more naturally, but
No, it didn't actually, because
okay.
when I first started to overcome the shock and started to read the official and public files, Ingeborg comes across as a very cold person. She didn't talk. She didn't talk much, and she didn't regret her crime. So at one point, I was actually asking myself whether I was able to write this book, because as she came across after this crime and compared to the person I knew far later, was a completely different person. So I almost gave up when I got all these letters that she wrote to her husband from prison, and that was not until 2.5 years into the process. And when I read these letters, I finally understood her much better, at least, because I wouldn't say that I still may not understand how a
Yeah.
person can do this, but at least I understood her better. And because, and I realized that, she was just 27 years old. She had lived a very sheltered life in this village. She basically hadn't traveled outside of this village that has 350, 400 people. She had lived all her life with her parents and siblings, and then with her husband. And all of a sudden, when this happens, she is on national news. She meets doctors and police officers, and she's sent way far from her home, and she's interrogated, and I realized that she must just have been terrified. That's why she doesn't say anything. That's my theory, at least, because in her letters that she writes to her husband, they are very loving, and she does regret what she did, and she asks her over and over again, "Don't forget me, please come and visit." And I that it was such a gift to get those letters, because then I realized that maybe the picture I had of her and the picture of the person she was when this happened wasn't that different. So then that's when I sort of got the realize how I should tell this story when I read her own words. And I decided to include the letters exactly as she wrote them. And some of them are not very coherent. She writes. Obviously, she only had 6 years of education, but you can also tell that she was in shock in the beginning when she wrote them, because she jumps from one subject to the other, from talking about her dead children, how much she thinks about them, and she can't understand why she did that, and she asks God for forgiveness, and in the next sentence she talks about what she had for lunch, and that the coffee is very good, and and she writes without capital letters and punctuation, etc. So I was very um, that must have been also very hard to translate, but I think Tom did a good job there too.
Yeah, and well, and so like you definitely had a big aha moment, right, with like, these letters and kind of getting a different side of, like the same story. And so like were there any other like aha moments along the way as you were writing or researching this?
Yes, there was one other aha moment, and that was when because the gravestone, the children's gravestone, had been buried for many many years, and there was some sort of rumor or something that they were buried besides their grandparents. And so when I got these letters from the and an old relative of Arthur, Ingeborg's husband, he said, "Well, let's find out." So we asked the verger at the graveyard to help us, and in 2016 they actually found the old gravestone
Oh,
of the
wow.
children. And that was also a very special moment. I was in Washington when that happened, and they sent me photos, and then I said to myself, I can't give up now. This must be like yet another sign that
Yeah.
I have to finish this book, because that was also so I dedicated my book to these children because they were my mother's cousins. So and they had been hidden for too many years, I think. So
Yeah, well, and what a beautiful thing, to dedicate to them as well, and like, and bring them to the forefront. So it's like, so well, in a way, you kind of answered my last question here. It's like, is that you had to dig a bit, right, to fill in some of the gaps along the way. So it's like, what it's like, getting these letters, I'm sure was a huge help, like finding some of that. I guess what would be the most surprising piece that you were able to dig up, or the most, I guess, like influential piece that influenced this book?
I would say that what most surprised me was how humane uh, the criminal system was back in 1930s in
Yeah.
Sweden. So actually, to a point, when I was reading the official public records from the prison doctor, for example, and the nurses, that they, invited her for coffee at their home, that the nurses or guards, the female guards, they picked flowers to her, and they had small, birthday parties. And I mean, it was a very small female prison, only 70 women, and that was the whole um, female prison population in the country that at that time. And the most common crime was theft, but the second one was child murder. So I was so surprised that these women were so well treated, but then to a point that I thought that maybe it's not true, maybe they just say that. But when
Uh-huh.
I read
Especially
that,
from the time.
exactly, so I figured maybe they just made all this up. But then I read the letters from Ingeborg to her husband. She actually tells the same story. So that was probably the most surprising, yeah,
Yeah, I was like, that would
element.
that would surprise me. I was like, especially again, especially for the time when you didn't have as much like oversight and things like that, and people got away with more things, and so it's like
Exactly, yeah.
that is pretty shocking. So, well, let's you share with me an excerpt from your book here, and so did you want to read it with me, or shall I read this? Do you want to read
Yeah, why don't
the
you
highlighted
read it,
parts?
and I can be Ingeborg or
All
the
right.
guard.
So, all
So
right, sounds good. You're Ingeborg in the guard, and I'll be everything else. For those of you that are
it's not a
watching.
fair share, but you
Oh, that's
go
okay.
ahead.
So I was like, it's my job to read these things. It's like, but
Yeah.
I was like, Maria, for those that weren't watching, Maria sent me a email saying I should bring a gavel. I couldn't find a good gavel, so I'll just, I I got a sour punch straw left over from Halloween, so I'll just smack that on the table, for dramatic effect here. So but yeah, so this is from the trial of after Ingeborg had committed these murders, and so like just kind of I guess kind of set the scene for us, Maria. We'll read some of it, and so we only have a couple pages here, so like set the scene, like what's kind of going on in this scene.
Yeah, so basically, this is April 1929. It's a month after, or less than a month after Ingeborg killed her children. And it's the first trial in an old courthouse very close to her village where she lived. So she arrives from prison together with a guard, and this court is filled with curious people, neighbors, and people from the village, and her family, of course, as well.
Okay, well, let's dive on in, and because I really want to show off your writing is fantastic. So here we go. The trial. It was 10 o'clock in the morning on April 5th, 1929. The court was packed with curious observers from the local villages and beyond. The damp heat clung to chairs and tables, walls and ceilings, in a venue where defendants were more usually on trial for the illegal production of and sale of liquor. Never before had the judge been called upon to try a murderess. Ingeborg walked toward the chair next to the judge's desk at the front of the podium. She almost lost her balance as the ground started to sway beneath her.
Here we are.
Said the custody officer, taking hold of her.
Just a few steps to go now.
Ingeborg shuffled to the last few steps like a sleepwalker. She collapsed on one side of the wooden chair, folded up her legs beneath her, and hunched up in order to not occupy more space than necessary. At the large oak desk, the presiding judge for the Boras circuit sat in splendid isolation in a high-backed, ornamented wood chair with a dark red velvet seat. A pale, lean man with a good head of hair. He picked distractedly at his long fingernails while waiting for the courtroom murmur to subside. A white handkerchief protruded from the left breast pocket of his jacket. "Silence in court!" cried the judge, banging his gavel. That was a sour punch straw I was hitting. I hereby declare the proceedings open. Attorney Frondin, counsel for the prosecution, rose to his feet and began his submission by outlining the defendant's personal details to the court. Miss Ingeborg Maria Anderson, née Olsen, born June 14th, 1901, in the parish of Vesene, has no criminal record. She is the daughter of August Olsen, farmer, and his wife Selma, who currently have dispensation to occupy a long farm in the parish of Vesene. Sorry, I'm butchering these words. The defendant has 3 brothers and 3 sisters, all of whom have reached the age of majority. Except for one sister, the defendant's siblings are all older than her. Some of them live with their parents, while others are married. The defendant attended elementary school in Vicene and is able to read and write. She was confirmed at the age of 14 at Soldra Bjorka Parish Church, having passed her religious knowledge examination. Since June 22nd, 1923, she has been married to Arthur Anderson, farmer. The marriage has produced 3 children: Tor, born April 9, 1924, Anders, born January 10, 1926, and Lucia, born December 13th, 1927. As the dead children's names were read out, there was a commotion among the audience, and the judge began to bang his gavel. "Silence in court!" "What is your first name?" asked the judge in an awe-inspiring voice. Ingeborg stared straight ahead without responding. "What is your first name?" repeated the judge, crossing his smooth hands on the desk in front of him while the villagers shifted on the court benches. "Could you tell us your first name, please, madam?"
Anderson.
replied Ingeborg. "I was asking for your first name. Are you troubled by the presence of all these spectators, Mrs. Anderson?" Ingeborg was holding onto the handkerchief so hard that her knuckles were white. She breathed deeply as the judge ordered the courtroom to be cleared. From time to time, she rolled her eyes with tense jaw muscles and slightly flushed cheeks. She then replied that her name was Ingeborg and she had recently turned 27. Are you a member of the Pentecostal Church, Mrs. Anderson? The judge continued his questioning, but Ingeborg did not hear him. I asked you if you were a member of the Pentecostal Church, repeated the judge.
No.
Replied Ingeborg. The meeting house is only a short distance from your home. Have you really never attended a Pentecostal meeting or brooded over matters of religion?
No.
The judge continued his examination. Have you been suffering from vomiting, indigestion, or anything like that?
No.
Replied Ingeborg. Mrs. Anderson, did you have any reason to be jealous, or was your husband violent on the morning of March 22nd, 1929? Had you previously ever thought about taking the lives of your children?
No. It just came to me on a whim.
And scene. So what a dramatic scene, right? And so kind of the intensity of it, getting the pauses in there, of course. And so yes, what a you set the scene so well. You capture it. And she cries out in the end, right? It came to me on a whim. It's just it's a fascinating case. So I really want to recommend to our readers, check out this book. Like I said, you do a great job of blending the humanity, the drama, the history piece to it. Maria's books are down there in the description below for those of you that are watching. If you're watching this later, definitely drop her a comment or check out those books later. So Maria, we're a very supportive community on Diabolic Shrimp. How else can we support you as an author?
Well, of course, you can start reading the book, right? If you want, or you can reach out to me at my website, mariabouroncle.com, or follow me on social media. I'm very active on Facebook and Instagram, but I'm also on Goodreads and LinkedIn if you prefer that. So, and it's wonderful to, if you have already read my book, it's wonderful to hear what you think, and don't
Yes, always drop a
message me
review.
anyway.
So Maria's already heard it all before, so she got it from her editor and from the translators, so she has a thick skin. No, it's a fantastic book, Maria. Thank you so much for just sharing a bit of your journey and joining us on Diabolic Shrimp.
Thank you so much for having me, Josh.
All right, Maria, I'm gonna send you back down below since we're running low on time. It always flies by, and then but thank you so much for being on the show.
Thank you.
So that was Maria Bouroncle. Again, like check out her work. I found it to be a fascinating book because, like I said, like as far as true crime goes, it captured everything I guess you could want from true crime, but it also really captured the humanity side of it, both examining like the humanity side for the poor kiddos who were murdered, but also looking at it was a look at that mental health and the fallout after that, and it was really fascinating look at that. So definitely check it out. Thank you so much for joining us. Those of you that joined us live, if you're joining us later, drop some comments down below. I'd love to share those with our guests. I'll share those with Maria if you have anything to say. And so definitely, if you want to join us on this journey, it helps out a lot. Hit that subscribe button, make that subscribe button burn. Ding that bell for notice. Drop us a comment. Drop us a like if you liked this show. Come check us out on diabolicshrimp.com. Authors and readers. We love to connect authors with readers. But thank you so much for joining us. This has been another Diabolic Shrimp. Have a good night.